Ron, would you like to come and join me?
How do you do?
You
It's
do.
been a while,
It has been a while.
about 50 years.
Yeah, if you're walking down the street and we've crossed paths, I don't think I would have known who you were.
It's mutual, right?
You've changed. We were two young guys in college together with the college. And how long ago was that?
Well, I figured it out. I needed time to make the calculation. It is 50 years. That's half a century in anybody's language, or 5 decades.
Yeah. And do you have any recollections of Whitley?
Several.
Okay. Would you like to share
how many
one?
would you like?
Would you like to share one?
Well, one of the earliest times I ever approached Whitley College was to admire the shape of the building, but around the front of the building there was a sign that had been put up by the students of a rival college. The sign said, Coliseum Enterprises presents Lions versus Christians.
Yeah, there you go.
And a week later, the sign had an extra addition. It said, event cancelled, sorry, no Christians.
There you go. I remember we had an outside catering service for the college, and they would bring the meals into us, and they had the guys had a test, the Hicks test they call it. Reverend John Hicks was there with us as well, and the test was if you could turn the plate of sweets upside down, pass it right around the table, and it got back there and passed the Hicks test. So that's what their sweets were like. So that was Whitley College. What have you been doing the rest of my life?
Well, Ray, you decided to continue with pastoring, and I last remember visiting you at Belmont. But I was obliged through a number of varied circumstances to pursue a teaching career. And so I moved from one school to another for a while and settled down in a couple, but I finished teaching before retirement by spending about 14 years at a Christian school in Wantirna.
Okay.
So a number of different schools,
Okay.
some church related, some Christian,
Okay.
and some state schools. Had a rather interesting time in
Wonderful.
various places.
Okay. So you've got Margaret there. What about the rest of the family?
Well, like yours, I suppose, it grew gradually, and then the children grew up, teenagers, good fun, and then teenagers find partners, and we had 4 children. They've all married, and we're blessed with 13 grandchildren.
You've got more than us. We've got 9. Yeah. Okay. All right. So there were a few people who, when I said you were coming, said, "Oh, we know who that is." I think no. Graham did. I thought you did too.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We're blessed to have known Graham for a while, and yes, Sue, we've met Sue before, and we've known Mark's uncle,
Right.
who had the flower farm.
I knew there was a connection. You said there. Yeah, well, we want to say welcome, Ron, and again, and sorry we've messed everything up again, but we were to have slides. We're now going to have whiteboard, and we're going to have Ron being the lecturer, teacher, showing us all about China. Now, what's this interest in China?
Well, Ray, early 90s, I responded to an advertisement in New Life newspaper that said we're going on a culture exchange mission to China, and we're looking for teachers and nurses and doctors and business people, and we're going to go there and do a few things and have a wonderful time. And because I was teaching, and because way back at Teachers College I'd done a social studies assignment on China, I thought, oh well, maybe I might be able to contribute something. So I put up my hand, and we had a wonderful fortnight in China in April '95. And because my Year 8 class, I was pastorally responsible in a particular school for a Year 8 class, and that particular year, when a group of students discovered that I was going to China, I wanted to take some Bibles wrapped up so that the identity of the book isn't obvious. If customs finds them, you can say, well, they're gifts, and customs will be embarrassed if they open a closed gift. So it was a number of students that helped wrap several gifts that I was able to include in my luggage for that trip. So that was my first encounter with China, and you would need a couple of hours if you wanted any more detail of those adventures. But it did lead to a lot of concern for China and concern for China's Christians. And it made me wonder whether I should learn Chinese at the age of 50. And it was a conscientious decision, no, don't spend your time, don't spend the rest of your life learning Chinese. It became obvious that the best thing to do to help Chinese Christians was to give them equipment. In other words, to deliver copies of the scriptures to them in their own language, which they would most certainly use, as they have been doing. And so that's what we ended up doing a number of times.
Okay.
Delivering bread.
We'll look forward to hearing the rest of your story. Okay. Thank you.
Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it." So Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives. All the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man. even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth." Now we're going to Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 9. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. And the Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all of the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. May the Lord add his blessing to this reading of his word. Amen.
It's been lovely to catch up with people that we know and to meet others. We hope to see some more of the others soon over a cup of tea if we have that pleasure afterwards. Thank you for making us feel welcome. Thank you for that reading. I suppose those of you who were really intent on the reading will be wondering why on earth there was a passage about the flood and a passage about the Tower of Babel. What on earth has that got to do with the advertised topic? Well, I hope it'll be made plain as we go along. I mentioned a mission trip to China back in 1995, and I want to explain to you a precinct in the south of Beijing that has something like this shape, but it is a huge park, a huge garden, and there are plantations of trees right across it, but not covering it 100%, because it runs north-south. I said it in South Beijing, but it has an axis that runs north-south. Let's say there's one prayer hall there and another prayer hall here, obviously smaller, and there is another structure here, quite large, and it is circular. And then next to this large structure, there is an incinerator here and some braziers. I've only put 5, there are actually 8. This garden and its structures and some other buildings were first established in 1420 because the emperor who had come to the throne at that time wanted to make sure that all the ceremonies that the emperor was supposed to do would be correct. And so he set people to studying the classical literature to find out the best way to pursue this set of celebrations. Because every year, probably for 4,500 years, whoever the emperor was in China had conducted this set of ceremonies and worship time every year for 4,500 years. This specially built precinct in Beijing was simply the last place that this set of ceremonies was held. Built in 1420, this hall was destroyed by fire late in the 1800s, and it was rebuilt, let's say about 1890. This hall was rebuilt. I'll say a bit more about these structures that I've put on the sketch, although there are other buildings dotted around the park, in between the trees. This building is a prayer hall. It has a triple-tiered roof. I'd love you to be able to see it. I've got a picture here somewhere. Maybe we'll spread those pictures out later. I said a triple-tiered roof, something like this. For that building, a large prayer hall. When I first looked inside that hall in 1995, I was surprised to see a number of display cases with animals, bullocks, sheep. And I thought, what on earth? But it did occur to me that it was a reminder of Old Testament sacrifices. They call it the Hall of Prayer for Good Harvests. Anyway, the journey of discovery continues. This particular prayer hall has a single roof. This structure is not a hall at all. It's a triple-tiered altar. So this is called the altar of heaven. Sometimes these prayer halls are referred to as the temple of heaven. But they're definitely not a temple in the sense of being the home of an idol. The way that they have a representation for the deity that is honoured in these two halls is to have a name board which has the Manchurian script and the Chinese script running downwards. That's traditional. The characters say, Heavenly Sovereign Shangdi. Really? both these prayer halls, in fact, the whole precinct is designed for the worship of the heavenly sovereign Shangdi. In China, every year, for probably 4,500 years, every year at the time of the winter solstice, that's round about Christmas time, the Emperor of the day would make sure that he had a clean bullock selected for sacrifice. He made sure that there were other items, other goods that were quality, suitable for sacrifice. And then the emperor and his retinue would undertake for a few days a series of prayers, worship songs, culminating with a time of sacrifice. The emperor of the day was, on behalf of his people, worshipping the emperor above, for whom they had a name, Shangdi. If you know your Old Testament at all well, you will have an echo in the brain. Shangdi, that is not unlike the Old Testament El Shaddai. Well, it was the intention of my presentation this morning to show you evidences that that would support the notion that the very earliest Chinese people who had migrated away from Babel, or whose forefathers had migrated away from Babel at the time of the confusion of the languages, it was my intention to show you the ways in which we can be convinced that those earliest Chinese people were in fact aware of and worshipped the God of the Bible, the God whom we worship too. Now, the Chinese government currently might not know much about this, or maybe a few of them do, but they can't or don't have the influence that will set their leaders on a more correct path. But I'm convinced that the earliest Chinese did know the one true God, the Emperor above. The emperors annually, whether they realised it or not, were worshipping the same God as the God of the Bible. Now, there are a few clues that we will talk about now. We'll take the roofs off and draw another rectangle, a small rectangle. Is there anyone who hasn't seen Chinese writing at all, ever? So if I talk about Chinese characters, although I can't read them and you can't read them, you know what I'm talking about. A Chinese character looks rectangular. It might have a few strokes in it or a lot of strokes. In fact, there is one character that has one stroke, and that's their numeral 1, believe it or not. But some of their characters have 30 strokes. And do I detect someone who knows something about Chinese writing? Am I talking sense? So far. So thank you. Okay, let this be a typical Chinese character. I want to tell you about a couple in particular because I know you'll be amazed. The character I'm thinking of is a large one, a large character, and it means big boat. Big boat. Now, it consists of other smaller characters. The character on the left side, no, I'm not going to draw the character. I'm not as silly as that, but we can represent the situation better than like this. The left-hand side of this character that means big boat separately means vessel. And the other side of the character has two quite small characters. The top right-hand one consists of the numeral 8. The bottom right-hand corner consists of another smaller particle which means mouth or person. Now, Chinese character, it means big boat, and it consists of the ideas and the signs that stand for vessel, 8, people. Do we know of a situation where there was a vessel with 8 people separately?
Yeah.
Madam, yes, the ark, a biblical concept. But here is this combination of ideas encapsulated in Chinese writing. Now, that's mind-boggling on its own, but have another one. Now this character has 2 halves like that. It has a top half and a bottom half. But the total of this character stands for righteousness. Righteousness. The top half in Chinese stands for sheep or lamb. And the lower half stands for I or me. Righteousness is represented by a sheep or a lamb over me, a lamb covering me. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a Chinese character. It's a modern Chinese character. Where would Chinese ever get this notion that a lamb could cover me in order to produce righteousness? Where else do we find that concept? Yeah, in the Bible. Several places. When Adam and Eve sinned and they got leaves and the covering was inadequate, God saw to it that their covering was improved through the death of a creature. They were covered. The Israelites getting out of Egypt, there was the Passover instituted. And of course, in Jesus' time, they celebrated the Passover and Jesus turned the Last Supper into a time of memorial. So we can celebrate communion. Another situation which is quite dramatic and profound, if I can sketch nicely, a kneeling woman. How can I do this? How can I draw a kneeling woman? Let's put her body and her head and kneel. How would she kneel? Is that our kneeling woman? Yeah. And she has no arms, but there's a tree here, and another tree here. This is not a modern character, but this is one of the earliest characters. We'll say a bit more about them in a moment. But this very early character has a woman kneeling in between two trees. She's facing one tree and has her back to the other. The time in the garden, and Eve had to make a choice. This is a genuine early character. These two are modern characters. Let's say a bit more about the earliest characters. The earliest characters of Chinese have been found on pieces of bone. You might not see it very well, but the piece of bone on the left of this illustration is the shoulder blade of an ox. And it has some marks on it which are recognisable as Chinese characters. In fact, we could pass that round if is that a sensible thing to try? So you take that one, but take this one as well, because this one is a piece of tortoiseshell. And that too has some of the earliest characters on. So they can go round together. Right, we're illustrating some of the very earliest Chinese writing. Now, a whole cache or collection of bone materials with writing on them was uncovered in a Chinese city called Anyang, or Anyang, depends whether you want to make it sound more Aussie. But there were hundreds of thousands of these oracle bones found. They're referred to as oracle bones because often people used them to try and foretell the future or to try and answer questions about life. So there are included on the writings on these bones lots of features of life. And it's Christian researchers who have studied these oracle bone characters who have said that what they have found in the oracle bone characters is that the components of the characters, see, we've got trees and a woman. These are components. They're component parts of larger characters. So that's an illustration of these early characters. There are many, perhaps 80% of these earliest characters have components that have what we might call a a sacred significance. Although the characters, many of the characters, might have begun as pictographic, the characters now express ideas. They've become ideographic. The big boat, different strokes. The righteousness, different strokes within the larger character. So the characters have become ideographic, even if previously, at the beginning, they were pictographic. But the Christian researchers who've studied the writing point out that 80% of the earliest characters are hieroglyphic. They have a sacred significance in that they talk about God and what he wants people to do and what people do in relation to God. So in that sense, these early characters have sacred significance because the components that make them up relate to the early events of the world's history, beginning with creation, people in the garden, the fall into sin, the rebellion, the expulsion from the garden, Adam and Eve kicked out of the garden, and life beyond that, God wanting to continue fellowship with the people, although they became alienated. We okay with that? I'm a real old these days, aren't we, Ray? And we get easily distracted. I'm sorry. 80% of the characters have sacred significance, yes, but these early characters have components that talk about the earliest history of the world. Expulsion from the garden and on into the time of the flood and on to the Tower of Babel. But the emperor above, although he expelled people from the garden, wanted to continue having fellowship with the people outside the garden. Hence the origin 4,500 years ago of the ceremonies that were last celebrated at this park in South Beijing. It's still there. It's kept as a tourist attraction. It's a fascinating place to go and see. I couldn't wait to get back, because in the meantime I had opportunity of reading up about this whole business of Chinese writing, scratch marks on bone, what they mean, the same accounts as Scripture gives us in Genesis 1 to 11. In China? Well, yes, in China. As surprising as that may seem. For me, it's been a very interesting journey. I think it's an extremely profound thing to have discovered, and I'm delighted to be able to share, at least in some fashion, this whole idea, because I think it's worth examining, knowing about, and sharing. Yes, the first Chinese people did know the God, the same God that we discover in Scripture. And there are a few other things we can take away from this as well. As I've already alluded to, what I've explained this morning in some measure, it gives us a confirmation of the first 11 chapters of our Bible, Genesis 1 to 11. We see the history played out, recorded and maintained. The record is maintained in a very unexpected manner. There's another aspect to this too. When Christian missions first went to China and some other countries, particularly in the Far East, that is the Far East from Europe, East Asia we're talking about, when Christian missions first went to those areas, people said, oh, it's a Western religion, it belongs to Europe. But, there are two books that I've valued particularly on this subject, and one is written by two Westerners who were involved in missionary activities in Thailand and Taiwan. The other book is authored by two Chinese people, one of whom was a businessman, so busy an evangelist in China itself, the mainland, that he was disbarred from having a visa in the future. But his book is still beauty, marvellous. When he first became a Christian at age 19 in Singapore, his family and friends used to say, you've abandoned your Chinese roots, your Chinese heritage. But when he discovered this sort of thing that I've been explaining, he realised that Christianity is just as much a religion, a way of life for the East, as it may have started in the West. And I think perhaps the final takeaway from this, not just from the talk, but from the way things have transpired to get us to this very moment. Power fading, power on again. Memory stick, fine. Backup memory stick, fine. But system that formed memory stick wouldn't talk to system that was supposed to deliver memory stick. But in any circumstances, God can work. So that's, in a muddled way, that's the final takeaway from this message, that God can work however he wants to, wherever he wants to, especially through people who are devoted to him. So with that, I conclude and say amen. If there are questions, you can ask me now, or a cup of tea. It depends on Owen, because he's got to guide us through the next few minutes. Thank you.